There was a time when the Buddha settled in the great city of Samarkand, where many people gathered to hear his discourses. But one day, a certain young man who had come regularly to these gatherings found the Buddha on his own and had the opportunity to approach him and say, "Master, I have a question. I've been coming to your gatherings for some years now, and I've noticed that some people have obviously reached enlightenment. Others pretend to be enlightened but act otherwise. And there are those that seem no different to when they first came. You're obviously an enlightened master. Why don't you just tap us on the head and bring us all to enlightenment?" And the Buddha looked at the young man and he said, "I can see from the cast of your features that you are not from this place. From where do you come?" And the young man answered that he came from the city of Bukhara. And the Buddha said, "Well, having traveled from your own city to this place, do you know the road very well?" "Oh," said the young man, "I know the road very, very well." "And do you have people asking you how to find their way to Bukhara?" "Oh yes," said the young man, "there are many who ask me how to find the road to Bukhara." "And do you tell them?" asked the Buddha. "Oh yes," said the young man, "I point out the way stations and the inns and the crossroads and which way to go and the pitfalls that they can meet, sometimes bandits on the way, and so forth." And said the Buddha, "Do you walk the road with them, or do you walk the road for them?" "Oh no," said the young man, "I don't walk the road with them, and I cannot walk the road for them." And the Buddha said, "You see, this is like the spiritual path. We have traveled the road and we can point out the pitfalls and the way stations and the way to go. But everyone must make the journey for themselves. And some choose not to make the journey, as undoubtedly you found yourself. Some go part of the way. Some are diverted, taking the wrong path at the crossroads. And there are some who reach their destination to Bukhara." Then there's the story of a man called Reza. And Reza coveted the produce that was in a farmer's field in a village nearby. So he decided that one night he was going to go to this farmer's field and steal 100 onions and bring them to the market to sell for a good profit. So riding his horse and taking a big sack along with him, and it being a very bright moonlit night, he had no problem finding his way to the farmer's field, where he started to dig up the onions. And after he'd gathered 100 onions and filled his sack, he put the sack on the back of his horse. But the poor horse, having this heavy load immediately placed on his back, began to neigh very loudly. And this awoke the farmer and his wife and the farmer's family, who immediately got up and saw Reza loading up his horse, and of course went out and accosted him. Well, in the morning they took him to the head man of the village to see what his punishment would be. And the head man said to Reza, well, you have 3 choices. You can pay 100 gold pieces. You can eat all the onions, or you have one more choice. So Reza decided that he would eat the 100 onions. And after he'd eaten about 25 and the tears were rolling down his face, he thought he would have enough of that, so he would make the next choice, which was to have 100 lashes on his back. So, having made that choice, he was given about 10 lashes, and the pain was so excruciating. Stop, stop, I'll pay the 100 gold coins, which he did and was released from his punishment. Where do these 2 stories meet in you? And without thinking, what arises out of the combining of their energies? Alchemy, the chemistry, the way of stories. The right brain and the left brain, subjective and the objective. One story very objective, and the other very subjective. Where do they meet, these 2? In us. And on this occasion, what arises from their chemistry? The meeting of subjective and objective. The meeting of a story that comes to mind. We can relate to it. It's linear. Has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a subjective story that can only be related to from our own inner experience. That's what subjectivity is. Where do they meet, and what arises in their meeting?
It's like they both say we have to experience things before we can choose or know.
That's right. And we can choose. isn't it? We can choose.
It's like that poor fellow who paid 100 in the end, you know, it's like, I don't feel like I've really had any choice. You know, there's always been, you know, if you veer off or take the way stations or anything, it is painful.
Yes, indeed.
And you've got to go back and pay that price anyway.
Exactly, exactly. Isn't that the meeting place of both these stories? Isn't that the meeting place of both these stories? Exactly. Exactly. So, bring it down to one sentence. Bring it down to a phrase. That summation.
Yeah, it kind of brings us into the right action.
Yes. What is it? What's the summation of these two when you bring them together, just as has been said?
Destiny.
Fate? Kismet? Okay, it's one way of looking at it, isn't it? No choices, and yet there's choices.
No shortcuts.
No shortcuts.
No turning around.
No, exactly. Exactly. Bravo, well done. That was a bit of a curveball, but we need to toss them now and again, don't we?